It's a brave new world out there, and when I close my eyes and I think Ubisoft, the word Assassin's Creed isn't the first thing that crosses my mind, no. Because for many years, Ubisoft was more than that. One of the most important gaming company in the world. They have been around since forever. They made Splinter Cell, Watch Dogs, Far Cry, Ghost Recon, Rayman, Rainbow Six. A long time ago, they were one of the good guys. They earned their place in the gaming world, especially in the shadow of Electronic Arts, Activision, and Rockstar. However, bridges take years to be built and minutes to burn. And Ubisoft began to grow restless in anti-player practices and customer-unfriendly methods and very controversial marketing for more than a decade, and it appears that their time is slowly running out. The rise of Ubisoft. In the long-distant 1986, Ubisoft was founded by the Guillemot brothers in Brittany, France. They started as a very small publisher, distributing games in a world before the internet. By the 90s, they were doubling in development. They made Rayman in 1995, which was a massive hit, proving to be the beginning, because in the 2000s, that's when Ubisoft took the crown. Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell was a revolutionary game, and I cannot stress this enough. It redefined stealth. Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, in 2003 was a platforming masterpiece. Then came Assassin's Creed in 2007. By 2009, Assassin's Creed 2 was a cultural phenomenon, and characters like Ezio Auditore became symbols in gaming. Ubisoft Montreal was the envy of the industry. And then, with the evolution of Far Cry, we eventually got Vaas in Far Cry 3, which became one of the most iconic and most memed villains of gaming. And then, of course, Watch Dogs in 2014, which promised to deliver a story that was never done before to that level. The hacker's fantasy. This was Ubisoft's golden age. Not free from controversy, but with innovative, ambitious, and delivering games. They weren't just making products, they were crafting experiences. Their revenue soared, and their studios expanded to a global level. By 2010, they were one of the top and main publishers of gaming. But this success inflated their ego, and Ubisoft's ambition came with a great cost. They got too comfortable. What started as a creative spark turned into a formulaic nightmare, which couldn't really break free from the mold that Ubisoft created. In 2010, out of nowhere, Ubisoft was still a new publisher on the scene, and they became obsessed with piracy, thinking that every single copy of their game that was pirated was a sale that was stolen from their wallets, and that players, as overall, they couldn't be trusted. This gave birth to a new draconian age for DRM, with the always online push for games like Assassin's Creed 2 and 3. That despite not being multiplayer titles, and they were just single player, Ubisoft demanded a constant internet connection to play. Your connection is spotty? Well, too bad, you cannot play. If the server is not available? Too bad. And don't forget that we are talking about more than 10 years ago, when most people didn't have the quality of internet that we have today. And some of us, including me, we still don't have it at all. This wasn't really about piracy. It was about feeding this absurd idea that Ubisoft could control legitimate players and punish them for playing the game. And the worst part, Ubisoft servers weren't really that great. Disconnects were common, and when they weren't, performance took a toll. This tarnished the launch of Assassin's Creed 2, and despite Ubisoft eventually patching things out, like eliminating the always online requirement, most of the damage was done, and more importantly, it showed a growing concern that the publisher cared more about locking down their products than delivering a good experience. This was just one of the first cracks in the trust built by Ubisoft at the time, and that their priorities were set in a wrong way. Another big scandal that tarnished trust in Ubisoft was in July 2013, when they had a massive security breach. This network breach exposed almost 60 million accounts, and we are talking about usernames, emails, passwords. Ubisoft claimed that no credit card information was stolen, but the damage was still real. Players were told to reset their passwords, and the media was merciless at the time against Ubisoft. Players entrust their companies with their data, and it's up to Ubisoft to protect it. This is not optional. Every breach creates permanent damage. Those information remain online. They can be bought and sold to malicious actors. And Ubisoft really dropped the ball here. In 2012, at E3, Ubisoft unveiled their next massive hit. It was supposed to be their response to Grand Theft Auto, the title that would put them on par against Rockstars. I'm talking about Watch Dogs. The trailer was incredible, especially at the time you had dynamic hacking, graphics that looked amazing. Everything screamed next generation. Players were incredibly hyped, and they got an insane amount of pre-orders. And Ubisoft didn't do anything to temper the expectation. They fueled the hype as much as they could. However, when 2014 came and the final game was released, it looked very different from what was unveiled at E3. It was like the graphic sliders were turned from ultra to potato. Textures were incredibly muddy, lighting was flat, and the PC version felt like a clear downgrade. The real problem, however, came later, when modders discovered that Ubisoft had disabled higher quality visuals, probably to avoid making console look inferior. Clearly the backlash was ferocious, despite Watch Dogs still being a game that I liked. This was in a different time when lying to customers wasn't a daily occurrence. And what was Ubisoft's defense? It's all about optimization. Watch Dogs still sold well, but this was another hit in the overall trust that people had in Ubisoft. And this was Ubisoft's first major lesson in overpromising and under-delivering, and naturally they never learned. Another big oopsie was in late 2014 with the launch of Assassin's Creed Unity. It was meant to be the next step in the series, the evolution to next generation. We're talking about Paris, crowds of people, and more importantly, co-op gaming. Instead, it was a glitch-ridden nightmare. The faces of characters vanished, leaving hilarious horrors. NPC clipped through the walls. Performance was horrible, with massive frame drops. The fallout was catastrophic for Ubisoft. Even reviews from generally optimistic outlets like IGN only gave it a 7.8. This is probably one of the lowest votes they can give to a major publisher. Moreover, sales for 2015 Syndicate suffered because of Unity disaster. What was Ubisoft's way to make things right? They gave a free DLC called Dead Kings, and they cancelled the season pass. But there is a small problem. When you accept this free content for season pass holders, you waived your right to sue. Yeah, that was not a great thing. It's kinda hard for me to talk about this because if you never played a Ubisoft game, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Ubisoft tailored an open world formula that was inescapable for at least several years to their project. It was in Assassin's Creed, it was in Far Cry, it was in Watch Dogs, or followed the same blueprint: clean a tower, or a church, or a radio maze, unlock the map, clear the outpost, collect 500 trinkets, and repeat. It was the Ubisoft checklist. And it was fine at the start, but the problem is that by 2017, it became synonymous. No innovation, no anything. Take Far Cry 4, for example, which came in 2014. It was a great game, but it was too similar to Far Cry 3 gameplay. Assassin's Creed Syndicate, same deal. Towers, side missions, rise and repeat. You get the idea. Ubisoft began to copy-paste their entire development team with a formula that you could not escape of. While this is fine if you copy yourself a few times, if you keep doing it over and over and over and over, and you just do it to add hours of filler content, people tend to be annoyed. Ubisoft's refusal to innovate wasn't just lazy, it was crazy. They found a way to make content in a streamlined manner that worked, and they milked it until people said that's enough. Another massive problem with Ubisoft came in 2019 when they launched Ubisoft Plus, which was supposed to be a subscription service that promised access to their library. Sounds normal, right? Well, of course, Ubisoft, they're the masters of the bad PR. And when executive Philippe Tremblay said, well, players don't own their games, that sounded pretty tone deaf, and it was like a middle finger to anybody that cares for preservation. What is gonna happen in 20 years once this company are bought or sold or the server go down? Well, the game is lost forever, and that is the case for several games that already got lost. Some got saved, but not every game can be saved. In the end, you are just paying for a license, and you should be grateful for that. Pay piggy. Base version of Far Cry 6 or Assassin's Creed Valhalla were skeletons with season passes, microtransactions holding the good stuffs hostage. Why is that? Well, money, of course. Ubisoft Plus felt like another way to lock players into that treadmill and not give them any freedom. The message, however, was extremely clear to anybody listening. Ubisoft doesn't want you to own their games. So, when you like the old product, they can just strip it away from you and force you to buy the next. Naturally, as many companies went on their high horses about NFTs, Ubisoft was one of them. In a buffering decision in 2021, Ubisoft Quartz program for Ghost Recon Breakpoint promised a blockchain-based cosmetic. The pitch? Own unique digital items. The reality? It was a JPEG scam with a carbon footprint the size of a small country. The announcement video was a disaster. Most people disliked it. Players were merciless. Even developers themselves allegedly hated it. With internal memos leaking dissent, the program was unprofitable and was quickly dismissed, and they even unlisted the video. However, the damage was done. Once again, Ubisoft managed to ruin their own reputation. It's a pattern in their communication that keeps happening. NFT was a solution to a problem nobody had, and chasing them showed a company desperate for money, not innovation. Due to the terrible decision that Ubisoft took in 2022, the CEO, Yves Guillemot, decided to take up things a notch because, there is never a bottom for the Ubisoft VR machine. After missing their sales target and delaying Skull and Bones again, he sent an email blaming employees for the company's woes. 6 delays for Skull and Bones? That's not a game, that's a hostage crisis. This tone-deaf move, well, of course, caused a strike at Ubisoft Paris with workers demanding more money and better conditions. This was the best demonstration that Ubisoft wasn't just screwing their own customers. It was also actively dodging every responsibility for all the bullshit that the suits did and blaming the poor developers, people that actually made the game. Allegedly, at least, I want to say this just in case. If you allegedly blame your team, your allegedly systematic failures, this is a bad way to run a company. It's how you destroy your morale, allegedly. But the march to misery for Ubisoft was far from over. The Crew was an open-world racing games developed by Ivory Tower Studio, and Ubisoft Reflections took the control of Alex Taylor, a street racer infiltrating a criminal organization through high-stakes race missions. The game featured a persistent online world, blending single-player and multiplayer elements with seamless co-op and competitive modes. Why am I talking about The Crew? Well, in December 2023, Ubisoft decided to delist The Crew. Wait, what does it mean, delist The Crew? Well, it means that the server were shut down, and this bricked the game. No offline mode patch was released, no refunds, just a void where your purchase time investment was put. This, after all, wasn't a game. Like Ubisoft told you, you will own nothing and be happy. No, wait, it wasn't them. Sorry. Players were furious, and some people considered this a digital theft. This even sparked a class action lawsuit in November 2024, accusing Ubisoft of misleading customers by selling products that they could become the most expensive brick in the world. Took the anti-consumer sentiment to a next level. First of all, just keeping a server up for a massive company like Ubisoft was probably not even that expensive, I'm sure that if they thought in their heads, do we really want another public relationship nightmare? They will probably realize that it was more effective to keep the game up. However, games aren't supposed to vanish. You buy them, you own them. Ubisoft threw the biggest middle finger to the entire industry. And this is concerning because it will cause other people to say, well, Ubisoft did it, let's go. The outcome of this lawsuit is still up in the air. However, Ubisoft will probably win because, let's be honest, they can write whatever they want in the term of service and they can even change them at will. The damage, however, was insanely devastating to the company. Ubisoft wasn't helping to preserve gaming history. They were actively denying it. And I'm sure that if Ubisoft could go and delete their old single-player games don't want you to own anymore, they will do it. It's puzzling to me how Star Wars games should be a guaranteed way to success. It is still, after all, one of the biggest and most popular properties, despite years of mismanagement. Well, Star Wars Outlaw in 2024 should have been a home run. I'm talking about a scoundrel adventure like you're taking the roles of a Han Solo with the Millennium Falcon. However, what happened was hard to describe. Repetitive missions, clunky control, broken stealth, an artificial intelligence that was incredibly dumb. Then the open world was simply not good. And most people agreed with me, causing sales to tank and even failing to crack the top 10 in major markets at the time. This, of course, was a devastating loss for Ubisoft because it's Star Wars, how hard it can be. But apparently it was too hard for Ubisoft. And then we have Skull and Bones again in 2024. After the success of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which was a great game in my opinion, and most people tend to agree with this sentiment, Ubisoft finally decided to make a pirate game. However, it became a pirate game that was delayed 6 times over a decade, meaning that it came out too late. And when it was finally launched, it was too late. Shallow gameplay, a barren open world, and of course, a live service model that nobody ever asked for, except the shareholders. The sales were extremely low, and even the Steam peak count was barely hitting the 10k players. This is a game that frankly should have been cancelled or entirely reworked. 2024 was a terrible year for Ubisoft, and X-Defiant was their best attempt, and I need to stress best attempt, at a free-to-play shooter to rival Call of Duty. It launched to a mild reception, but it was kinda generic from what I heard. Usual gameplay, balance issues, and lack of identity. So pretty much it had brought no innovation, kinda normal with Ubisoft. In December 2024, Ubisoft announced the shutdown, with server closing in June of 2025. Even worse, they closed down the San Francisco and Osaka studios and they laid off 300 employees. It was terribly damaging, not just for Ubisoft PR, because, well, that one is already in the crapper, but more for the inner morale inside of Ubisoft, I believe, because if you cannot even copy Call of Duty right, what the hell are you doing? Maybe you have no business to stay in game anymore. Plus, losing studios and talent for your poor management decisions, allegedly, should not be kinda rewarded, but it is what it is. These were, however, symptoms of something that was gonna happen later that year, with Ubisoft cutting corners to survive a crisis of their own making. And then we finally have it. Assassin's Creed Shadows. Ask yourself this. How hard is to sell an Assassin's Creed set in Japan? It should be a no-brainer, right? People love samurai, shinobi, and plus you are an assassin, so should be the best setting ever. Well, in 2024, Ubisoft announced Assassin's Creed Shadows, set in feudal Japan, and became quickly one of the most anticipated settings in the saga. However, somehow, Ubisoft, in all their wisdom, decided to throw a 100% sure assured W into their biggest fatal through a series of tactical controversies of self-inflicted nature. It's like seeing the walking meme of the guy that puts a stick in the wheels of their bicycle and then blames someone else for falling. The first was the bizarre choice of Yasuke, a black samurai, and a protagonist that sparked debate. Some praised the diversity, others cried for the historical inaccuracy, arguing that this was cultural appropriation and it had nothing to do with Japan. However, Ubisoft marketing decided to go, hold my beer. And they weren't just happy with that. They were like, let's convince our detractor even harder. We don't know what we are doing and we are full of... They used a battle reenactment group flag without permission. And they had to apologize for it. Then, in a collector edition figurine, they used a Torii gate. The identical one that is the symbol of the Nagasaki World War II bombing, you know, the nuclear bombing, because, you know, it's kind of important for Japanese people as a symbol. Well, I'm not Japanese, but I can assume that it's meant to represent the worst scar that your country went through. And that really took the cake. You simply cannot defend this. And there are others. The game was delayed to February 2025. And they even cancelled the Tokyo Game Show press. And what happened when the game was released? Shadows was the same as Skull and Bones and as X-Defiant, as Star Wars Outlaws. It was lazy. It was rushed. It was filled with bugs, especially in stealth. Open world was plotted with the same repetitive task. And the story was not really good. And there are even a host of other complaints that I will not say here because it will polarize the discussion. And I'm not here to talk about that. I am here to talk about Ubisoft laziness, sloppiness, and arrogance. Shadows wasn't just a bad game. It was a symbol of everything wrong with Ubisoft. A tone-deaf marketing and refusal to back off. The Fallout was bad. And it cemented the reputation of a company that can't deliver anymore anything. And what was the final outcome? By April 2025, Ubisoft was a mess. Their stock was at decade low. Their games were flopping and their reputation was still going down. The financial tells the story. 494 million losses between 22 and 23. They lowered their targets in 24 from 2.3 billions to 2 billions. Studios were closing, with even more layoff in January 2025, and more talent is leaving the company, with developers looking for greener pastures, pretty much a sinking ship. In early 2025, Ubisoft announced that Assassin's Creed would be bundled into a Tencent-backed subsidiary. This was very confusing at the time, since I'm not very intelligent. I had to reread this part several times to understand. Tencent, who held 5% stake of Ubisoft in 2018, even got a bigger grip and offered a lifeline to a company that was dying. This is not a comeback or a victory. It's a sellout. Ubisoft's best properties, their legacy, are now part of a corporate chess game. For Ubisoft, a company that was thriving in innovation more than 10 years ago, that revolutionized stealth, that pushed out great titles in the past like Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, to come to this point, well, it's just very sad. If Ubisoft wants redemption, they need to stop chasing trends and start to go back, change the way they do marketing, and they need to put quality first. They need to be willing to take risk, because even if you decide to not take risk, you are still taking a risk by selling a product that is outdated or lacks innovation too many times. Listen to your players, or at least your own developers sometimes. But seriously, I'm afraid that it might just be too late now. Thanks for watching. Drop your comments below. What is your opinion on Ubisoft? If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Have a good one. See you.